The sun had no mercy that season. It rose early and blazed over the small forgotten village as if testing how much heat a soul could bear before it broke. Dust clung to every leaf, every wall, and every tired body that crossed the fields. In the middle of that world of cracked earth and silent endurance lived a young woman named Amara, whose days began long before dawn and ended only when darkness finally swallowed her. Each morning, while roosters still fought the air with their cries, Amara would lift 2 iron buckets as tall as her knees and walk the long dirt road to the well. Her stepmother watched from the wooden veranda, lips pressed tight, eyes sharp as thorns. To her, Amara wasn't a daughter of the house. She was its servant, its pack animal. "Hurry!" came the voice like the strike of a whip. "The sun won't wait for lazy hands." The stepmother's daughters, Zinhel and Tiro, sat fanning themselves under a patch of shade, pearls of laughter bouncing around them like cruel pebbles. "Look at her," one hissed, pointing. "She walks like a mule that forgot how to stand proud." The other added, "Imagine, she still dreams of being more than dirt." Their words drew giggles from a few children nearby and startled glances from the women who passed on their way to market. No one dared answer. No one ever did. The worst silence came from her father, Kofi, who stood behind the doorway, half hidden, half consenting. He watched his daughter's shoulders stoop, watched the sweat roll down her brow, and did nothing. No defense, no command, not even pity. For Amara, that silence began to weigh heavier than the buckets themselves. It was the silence of being unseen, the silence that hollows a person from the inside out. Each trip to the well became a small pilgrimage of pain. The earth was hot enough to burn through her bare soles, the metal handles cut into the hard skin of her palms. The air shimmered like glass, and still, step after step, she carried water for people who mocked her thirst. Every drop that spilled seemed to trace a glittering path of humiliation down the road. But Amara carried more than water. She carried the memory of what a father's love should have been, the echo of a mother's voice long gone, and a quiet belief that someday the world might see her heart instead of her burden. Deep in her eyes lived a small light, thin, trembling, persistent, like a candle burning in a cave after the storm has blown out all others. The villagers pitied her in whispers. They watched her pass by with tired smiles and helpless murmurs. A few clucked their tongues. One old woman muttered, "The good earth sees everything," but kept her hands folded. Fear of the stepmother's temper chained their compassion. Evil, when crowned by social standing, is rarely confronted. And so the cruelty of one home became the shame of many hearts. Still, Amara dreamed while walking that dusty path. Sometimes, she imagined what it might be like if someone, anyone, stopped beside her, took one bucket and said, "You've done enough." She dreamed of a gaze that would not look past her but into her, a voice that would name her not as servant or burden, but simply Amara. And though the fantasy melted each time the sun climbed higher, it kept her alive. One afternoon, the heat was worse than usual. The sky trembled in waves. When Amara bent to fill her buckets, her arms quivered. She could feel her pulse hammering in her neck, her legs weak from hunger. The water rose in the rope-drawn pail with a soft splash, reflecting the faint blur of her face. She breathed once, twice, and lifted. The metal seared her hands. It didn't matter. She began the long walk back, her shadow trembling beside her. Halfway home, her foot struck a hidden stone. She fell forward, hard, the buckets tumbling from her grip. Water spilled everywhere, vanishing into dust almost instantly. From somewhere behind her came laughter. High, cruel laughter. 2 silhouettes appeared along the path, Zinhel and Tiro, gossiping and giggling, delighted by her fall. "Look at our slave," Zinhel shouted. "She can't even keep water in a bucket." The words pierced her like arrows, but she refused to stay on her knees. With shaking hands, she wiped the tears, then the dust from her face, and stood up. She gathered what water she could, dragging the heavy containers upright again. It was another small humiliation added to thousands before it. Yet her back straightened anyway. Inside her chest, something spoke softly. "I will not break." And that was the moment everything began to turn. Down the road, near a cluster of wild shrubs where few ever paused, sat a stranger in plain clothes. His shirt was worn, But his posture was not of a poor man. There was a calm in his movements, a quiet steadiness that drew the eyes. He had arrived only that morning, walking from the rich northern lands, but kept his identity hidden. His name was Wame, though some far away called him heir to the richest fields beyond the ridge. When Amara stumbled again trying to lift the buckets, Wame was on his feet before thinking. "Please, allow me," he said, his voice gentle and clear. She turned, startled, like a bird that hears footsteps too close. No one had ever offered help. Instinctively she tried to pull away, but Wame bent down beside her, took hold of one bucket, and steadied it with practiced ease. "Thank you," Amara whispered, eyes low. She spoke quietly, as though afraid her gratitude might be overheard by someone ready to punish it. "There's no need for thanks," he replied, dusting his hands. "These buckets are heavy work for one person. Let me walk with you." He said it simply, not as charity, but as if it were natural for one human being to share another's weight. Something inside Amara startled again, not from fear, but from warmth. His words didn't carry pity. They carried respect, and that felt rarer than gold. As they walked, their steps matched without effort. The silence between them felt different from the silence she lived with at home. This one was gentle, filled with curiosity that didn't intrude. Wame glanced sideways once and asked softly, "How long have you done this alone?" Amara hesitated. The truth had no habit of being spoken. "Since my mother left," she said at last. The syllables fell like drops of lead. Wame didn't question further, but a shadow passed through his eyes. Understanding, not sorrow. He had seen such weight before, worn by people told their pain was ordinary. The road curved upward toward the house, where a thin column of smoke rose from the cooking fire. Amara's pace quickened. "You shouldn't come farther," she said hurriedly. "If they see you, it'll be bad." She took the buckets from him, her arms trembling not from the load but from nervousness. "I see," Wame said. His voice was calm, but there was something else in it, a quiet promise. "Still, it isn't right, what they make you do." Amara avoided his gaze. Kindness was dangerous. Too many times she had learned that warmth could burn. Still, his words clung to her like a cool breeze. When she crossed the last stretch toward the yard, she turned once, unable to resist. He was still standing there at the bend of the path, sunlight on his shoulders, watching silently, not with pity, but with acknowledgement. It was the first time in years someone had looked at her as if she existed fully. That night, when the mocking voices had faded and the house lay asleep, Amara curled up in her small corner near the kitchen fire. The glowing embers painted soft light on the walls. She could still see the stranger's face in her mind. Not a handsome face in any striking way, but open, honest, the face of someone who did not look through her. She touched her sore palms, thinking of the way he had held the bucket steady so easily, of the way his eyes had spoken without words. "You are not invisible." It was a simple memory, only minutes long, yet it carried warmth into the cold crevices of her heart. For the first time in her life, she fell asleep not fearing the next dawn, but wondering, just wondering, if fate had finally begun to listen. And so it ended where this part began. That night, as she lay down in the cold corner where she slept, Amara couldn't forget the stranger's face. It wasn't a face marked by beauty or wealth, but by a rare sincerity. She wondered who he truly was, and why, in a world so used to turning its back on her, someone would have stopped to extend a hand. She didn't know it, but that encounter so simple would be the beginning of a change that would shake not only her life, but the entire village. Because sometimes fate chooses to enter our lives discreetly, almost invisibly, like a weary traveler offering help by the roadside. And in that small gesture, hope is reborn. Villages, even the smallest half-watchful eyes and sharp tongues. Nothing goes unnoticed where everyone knows everyone and every step is accompanied by murmurs. When Kwame appeared at Amora's side, even if only to lift a bucket or steady a load, it didn't take long for whispers to rise in the markets along the riverbanks and in the mud-packed corridors between houses. The neighbor women, ever vigilant, noticed something different. The girl who had once been invisible, the one everyone treated like a shadow, now had company. A stranger, young and humble, yet firm in bearing, seemed to draw near whenever he could. It was enough to see him in the distance for their eyes to find each other. People spoke in low voices as if guarding a collective secret, but inevitably, the words slipped out. Who is that young man helping the water carrier in the market among stalls of maize and beans? The conversations multiplied. Some women said it was simply compassionate that he had a good heart. Others, more mischievous, suggested there might be something more. A man doesn't look at a woman like that unless there's a hidden fire. The heart of the village, which had always known Amara's hidden pains, began to beat too. The rhythm of this new story, but not everyone looked kindly on it. Near the stepmother, had a keen nose for any threat to her authority. When she realized the talk was spreading, she filled with rage. She called Amara inside in front of her daughters and warned her harshly. "Don't you dare go near that stranger. You'll bring nothing but shame on us. It's bad enough you haul water like a mule. Don't stain this family's name with your filthy presence." The words were blades and each one cut deep. Amara didn't reply. She only lowered her head, swallowing the pain as she always did. Yet deep in her chest, something new was blooming. The memory of Kwa's voice, simple and steady, saying she didn't need to thank him, that she deserved help. That thought was a secret balm against the insults. Meanwhile, in the village circles, there were those who stood up for the girl. An elder named Mama Yali, known for her wisdom, said aloud, "That girl has suffered more than many of us. Perhaps it's time someone saw her as a woman, not a slave." Others, however, shook their heads, suspicious. "Who is this young man?" "No one really knows him. He could be a ruthless wanderer. Today he helps, tomorrow he vanishes, and she's back to carrying buckets alone." These debates laden with concern, curiosity, and even envy that Amara's life was no longer invisible. For the first time, her pain was being spoken of as something that belonged to the entire village. And there was something more. Whenever appeared near her, the neighbors' silence felt different. It wasn't mere curiosity. It was as if each of them sensed deep down that they were witnessing something larger than simple compassion. Perhaps it was the way he looked at her as one who sees beyond dust and humiliation. Perhaps it was the way Amara, even ashamed, let slip small gestures of gratitude, a slight lifting of the eyes, an almost smile, rare as rain in the dry season. Heir, however, would not admit weakness. She gathered her daughters and spoke loudly, so Amara would hear. "Don't think someone like him would want a shadow like you. Men seek beauty, not misery. Remember that before you start dreaming." The laughter of Zinhal and Tiro filled the house, cruel as lashes. But paradoxically, the more the stepmother tried to smother her, the more a shy flame grew in Amara's heart. Because deep down, Kwam's words had already left a mark. No humiliation could erase. He had treated her like a human being, and the whole village knew it. They knew there was a stranger who saw the girl differently. They knew something was happening, even if it was still only a thread of hope. The rumors ran like the wind, carrying with them a mix of expectation and tension. The heart of the village already knew, even before she could admit it to herself. Destiny had begun to move its pieces, and nothing would ever be the same. The sun blazed high in the sky when Amara once again left the house with the iron buckets. Her feet were already covered in open sores, and each step seemed to wrench away what little strength she had left. Her hands trembled, her body staggered, but she knew she had no choice. If she returned late with the water, she would face Naira's screams and the venomous mockery of Zinhal and Terera. There was no mercy within those walls. Each trip to the well was torment. Each drop she carried felt torn from her soul. That day, however, exhaustion was stronger than ever. As she tried to balance the two buckets, Amara felt her legs give way. The world spun for an instant, and she nearly fell to her knees. The weight crushed her, not only her body but her heart. Sweat streamed in rivulets and eyes brimming with tears mixed with the dust. It was in that moment of weakness that something different happened. On the other side of the path appeared. He had been watching in silence, but when he saw the young woman falter, he ran without a second thought. Before she could fall, he seized the buckets firmly. Amara tried to resist, fearing the neighbor's eyes, but his strength overcame her stubbornness. Suddenly, the weight lifted from her shoulders. "I'll walk with you," Kami said. Simple words, heavy with conviction. Amara stood still for a moment. She was used to hearing orders, enduring insults, carrying burdens alone. No one had ever offered to share the load. When she realized this wasn't a dream, her eyes filled with tears, not of pain this time, but of relief. And the unexpected happened. She smiled. A timid, embarrassed smile, but a true one. It wasn't the gesture of someone receiving a grand gift, but of someone finally experiencing something simple that had been denied for years, the feeling of being seen. The villagers who watched from afar fell silent. The neighbor women who once whispered about the girl's life now saw with their own eyes what was happening. Amara, the water carrier, humiliated day after day, walked beside a young man who held her buckets as if they were his as well. The scene was small but powerful. To many, it looked like nothing more than a boy helping a tired girl. But to Amara, it was the first spark of hope, because that gesture was not just kindness. It was recognition. It was respect. For the first time, she did not feel like a burden. She felt like a woman. Didn't speak pretty words, didn't make grand promises. He simply walked at her side, buckets in hand, as if that were his natural place. And that simplicity was precisely what made it so profound. When they neared the house, Amara tried to take the buckets back. She feared Nai's reaction. She knew the stepmother would see it as defiance, as a cause for shame. But Kam held on and handed the containers over only at the door. Before leaving, he looked at Amara and said, "You shouldn't carry everything alone. Not the water, not life." Those words echoed in her heart like seeds cast on parched ground. For years, Amara had believed that being born alone meant living alone. But in that instant, she understood that someone could share her burden. That night, as she laid down in the cold corner of the house, she did not cry from pain as she usually did. She cried with relief. She remembered the smile that had escaped in public, and for a moment, she felt no shame. She discovered that the world did not collapse when she showed her joy. On the contrary, she felt stronger. And so the simple act of carrying 2 buckets of water became a milestone. A small gesture to those looking from the outside, but enormous to someone who had been invisible for so long. In that moment, Amara realized hope does not always arrive with great miracles. Sometimes it arrives as a humble young man holding a bucket by the roadside dot. And without noticing, the whole village began to change because everyone saw the water's slave smile. They saw that even a shadow could be brought into the light, and the heart of the village understood that something greater was taking place. For a long time, Nyari cultivated the certainty that she completely controlled Amara's fate. To her, the stepdaughter was nothing more than an obedient shadow, her presence tolerated only to serve. But when the stepmother began to hear the village rumors, when she saw the curious looks from the neighbor women, and noticed the timid smile daring to appear on the girl's face, something inside her flared into fury. This wasn't merely a risk, it was an affront to her authority. One morning as Amara was returning from the well with her buckets near watched from the veranda, eyes fixed like a serpent lying in wait. From afar she saw Kwam approach once more, ready to share the load. A scene simple to anyone else struck Nari like fire thrown onto dry straw. Her heart filled with rancor and an old hatred perhaps fed by envy took over. That day, Nari decided to expose her stepdaughter before everyone. As Amara crossed the village square, carrying her burden as always, the stepmother suddenly appeared, shouting words that rang out like sharpened arrows. "Look, all of you. This miserable girl now fancies herself entitled to seduce men with her false frailty." The square, crowded with vendors and neighbors, fell silent. Everyone stopped to look. Naira's daughters, Zinhel and Tiro, laughed loudly, egging their mother, unlike satisfied hyenas around fallen prey. And before everyone's eyes, Nari seized Amara by the hair and yanked her violently. The young woman fell to her knees. The bucket tipped and water spread across the dirt ground like the very blood of her dignity. People stared, some shocked, others silent accomplices. A few men shook their heads, muttering that it was too much, but none dared intervene. After all, Nay was known for her venomous tongue, and few wished to confront her. Amara tried to rise, but Nay shoved her again, spitting poison-laced words. "Since you were a child, you've been dead weight in this house, and now you want to draw attention with that filthy face. You'll never be anything but a useless slave." In that instant, the scene changed. Quaim, watching from a distance, could no longer stand still. He pushed through the crowd and placed himself between Nero and Amara. With a steady arm, he shielded the young woman, lifting her from the ground. "Enough." His voice rang out louder than the stepmother's. "You have no right to humiliate a daughter of God before the whole village." A heavy silence fell. No one had ever confronted Nay like that. The stepmother, surprised, was speechless for a moment, but soon her tongue recovered its venom. "And who are you to meddle in family matters?" A ruthless stranger, daring to challenge Mether, one who has always kept this house in order, answered, unwavering. "Order is not cruelty. Love is not humiliation. This young woman deserves respect, and everyone here knows it, even if they pretend not to see." His words fell like thunder. Many other simplicity revealed his dignity, and more the looks that had once been filled with contempt for Amara began to turn into quiet respect. Near, however, would not give up, and deep down the young water carrier sensed the battle was far from over. Because envy, when it grows unchecked, is not content merely to wound. It wants to destroy. Nights in the village were long for Amara. Her exhausted body begged for rest, but her heart remained unsettled. Since Kami had revealed his secret by the riverside, she couldn't sleep without hearing his words in her mind. You shouldn't carry everything alone. Not the water, not life. Those phrases repeated within her like a hidden song, impossible to silence. But along with hope came fear. The fear that had always accompanied her. The fear of believing too much and being knocked down again. After all, her whole life had been made of rejections. Her father Kofi, who never defended her, treated her like dead weight. Her stepmother Nari, who reduced her to nothing, turned every day into a torture. Her stepsisters, Zinhal and Terarero, who laughed at every stumble, reminded her of her place. How could she believe that now? Suddenly, someone would choose her. One night, while gathering firewood, Amara and met again. The silence between them wasn't the silence of strangers, but of those who carry something larger than can be said. Kame watched her concerned, noticing that the recent light in her eyes seemed dimmed again. "Why are you hiding from me, Amara?" he asked, calm but firm. She lowered her head, her heart raced, her hands trembled. "Because I am not worthy of you, Ami. You are the son of Oba Mensa. You have land, wealth, respect. I am only the servant who carries water, the slave of a cruel stepmother. I am nothing." May stepped closer and held her face gently, like someone holding something precious that might break. "Don't ever say that again. You're nothing." "Then what is dignity if not what you show every day? You endure humiliations without becoming bitter. You carry burdens without losing faith. You are stronger than any title could make you." His words made Amara cry, but they weren't easy tears. They came from deep wounds that had been hidden inside her for years. She wept because she wanted to believe, but her stepmother's voice still echoed louder. "You will never be anything but a useless slave. I'm afraid, Wami. Afraid to believe you. Afraid to open my heart and then be thrown to the ground as I always have been." Clasped her hands with a firmness that left no doubt. "I am not here to toy with your heart. I am not here out of pity. I am here because I saw in you the most dignified woman in this village. I could have riches, but what are herds and lands worth if the heart is empty? You carry the one thing no one can buy, the truth." The stars shone above them, and the night winds seemed to bear witness to that moment. Amara felt her chest tremble. For the first time, it wasn't only pain that possessed her. It was also the desire to be loved. Desire she had always kept hidden like a forbidden thing, but the fear was still there, like an invisible chain. She stepped back a little, as if she needed to protect herself. "If I believe you calm, and it all turns out to be just a dream." He smiled, but it wasn't a light smile. It was weighted with seriousness, almost with a promise. "Then let it be the truest dream you've ever lived. Because I'm not leaving, I chose to stay." His words rang deep. Yet Amara still trembled. Not because she didn't want to believe, but because she had never been given that right. Love to her had always been distant ground reserved for other women, never for herself. Now before her stood someone offering not just help, but his whole heart. That night, as she lay down in the cold corner of the house, Amara could not sleep. Between fear and love, her heart flickered like a flame in the wind. Part of her wanted to run, to hide, to shield herself from pain. But another part, deep quieter, wanted to finally believe. And perhaps that was the greatest battle of her life. Not against the stepmother, not against the village's scorn, but against her own fear of being happy. Because love, when it arrives, demands courage. And Amara was still learning to believe she was worthy of it. The village fars with a beating heart of community life. That was where everyone met, where news spread faster than the wind, where joys and tragedies became common talk. That day, the bustle was intense. Women haggled over sacks of maize. Children darted between baskets of fruit. Men argued over the price of goats. And in the midst of that commotion, Amara walked on, still timid, face always lowered, carrying some vegetables near had forced her to sell. But something was about to happen. The stepmother's resentment, already smoldering, found its opportunity in that place where everyone was gathered. Near didn't want merely to control Amara at home. She wanted to destroy her publicly, to strip away any shred of dignity before the eyes of the whole village. Then, amid the hub near, raised her voice, strong, sharp, like a knife, cutting through silence. Her accusation rang out. "Look, all of you, at this useless thing. This water's slave thinks she can pass herself off as a worthy woman. She's nothing but a worthless servant, one her own father wouldn't even defend." The impact was immediate. People fell silent and turned to watch. It was as if the entire fair had stopped. Amara froze. Her hands trembled. The vegetables fell to the ground and her heart hammered in her chest. The blood seemed to drain from her face. Words that had so often been spoken in secret were now hurled like stones before the whole community. Near Eye came closer, still pointing an accusing finger. "Tell me, does your boldness come from? Do you think you can win men over with that hungry face? Do you think you can climb where you don't belong? You will always be nothing. Nothing but dust beneath our feet." The silence was heavy. Everyone looked on, some with shame, others with curiosity. It was a spectacle of humiliation, and many didn't know how to react. In that instant Wam appeared, pushing through the crowd. His gaze was steady, his posture erect, his voice carrying an authority no one had yet seen in him. He stopped before Amara took her hand firmly and lifted her from the ground. The entire market held its breath. "Don't you dare call her useless again," said Meeting Na's eyes without wavering. "Because before me, before all of you, I declare she's the most dignified woman in this village." A murmur rippled like a wave. People looked at one another. Some covered their mouths in shock. Others nodded in quiet approval. No one had expected such a public declaration. Amara, still stunned, felt his hands firm around hers. It was as if that strength held her up when her own legs no longer could. Her heart, long accustomed to shame, now burned with a new heat, the heat of dignity, recognized. NY tried to laugh, to turn everything into mockery. "Dignified this shadow, you must be blind. Boy, there are many women in this village who can give you beauty, respect, healthy children. But her, she's nothing but a burden." Quame did not flinch. He raised his voice so that all could hear. "Beauty without character is an empty vessel. Respect born of lies does not endure. True worth isn't in appearances, but in the courage to bear pain without losing one's soul. And that only she has." His words rolled like thunder across the market. The crowd remained in absolute silence. It was as if in that moment, each person was forced to look within and acknowledge what they had always ignored. Amara wept, but not from shame. She cried because, for the first time, someone had turned her pain into honor before everyone. It was as if the burden of years had begun to fall from her shoulders. Nai, red with rage, tried to find words, but nothing came out. Her daughters Zinhel and Terra shrank back, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The stepmother's power, upheld for years by fear, began to crumble before the courage of a young man who dared to say aloud what no one else had, and the fair witness to that confrontation would never be the same. For everyone knew that day marked the end of a cycle. The villagers' complicit silence had been broken. The truth spoken before all could no longer be erased. Standing beside, Amara understood that the moment was not just about her. It was about all the women who had been humiliated in silence, about all the voices stifled by fear. And as she felt his hand firm in hers, she knew that the inevitable confrontation had also brought the first victory. The morning after the confrontation at the fair, the silence that settled over the village was not routine. It was a heavy, almost reverent silence, as if each person was still digesting what they had witnessed. The voices that had always rushed to repeat humiliations now held back. The eyes accustomed to looking down on Amara avoided meeting hers. The fair, the river, the footpaths, everything seemed changed, the unthinkable. He had taken the hand of the young woman. Everyone considered a nobody, and declared her the most dignified among them. There was no wealth, no appearance, no social favor propping up that gesture. It was pure recognition. Truth laid bare before the crowd, and the weight of that gesture began to change the entire village. On the path to the well, where once there had been the mocking laughter of Nay's daughters, there was now silence. Some women who had only watched before began to look at Amara with respect, shame, even for having done nothing sooner. Men who had so often turned their faces from her humiliation now greeted her with a timid nod. It was as if everyone suddenly saw what they had long pretended not to see, the dignity that had remained intact even after so much. Present lowered their eyes, ashamed. After all, everyone knew of Amara's suffering, but no one had ever had the courage to defend her dignity. And now, before them all, that young man, claiming to be merely a traveler, Hadrason as her voice. Amara, still trembling, looked at Wayne with a mixture of astonishment and gratitude. No one had ever stood between her and the stepmother's violence. For the first time, she felt protected. Not because someone had saved her from carrying a bucket, but because someone had dared to face the very face of injustice that had crushed her since childhood. NY, consumed by fury, shouted once more, but her voice no longer carried the same force. The people murmured. Some women whispered that this had gone too far. The image that had once projected power began to crack under their gaze, and in that moment, the mask fell. The stepmother, so used to controlling everyone through fear, was exposed there before the whole square. It became clear that it was not strength but cruelty, not respect but tyranny. Standing beside Amara felt that something had changed. For the first time, the village did not see her only as the girl who carried water. They saw her as someone worth defending. In that instant, even with her heart still sore, she understood Naira's shadow was not invincible. And deep down, the village was beginning to understand that as well. After the scene in the square, when Kame dared to place himself between Amura and Nara's fury, something changed in the air of the village. People still murmured softly in the markets and at the water sources, commenting on the young outsider's courage. But Amara, though grateful, was afraid. No one had ever risked so much for her. She carried in her heart a mix of fear and hope, as if she were living something that did not belong to her fate. That afternoon, as the sun hid behind the hills, Kwame found her by the river. The place was silent, only the sound of the water breaking against the rocks. Amara sat with her feet plunged in the cold current, trying to dull the pain of her wounds. He approached slowly, as if not wanting to startle her, and sat beside her. For a few moments, they remained silent. The river flowed and time seemed suspended. You didn't have to do that, Amara said in a low voice, still trembling from what had happened. Now my stepmother will hate me even more. Looked at her calmly, but there was fire in his eyes. I didn't do it out of bravery, Amra. I did it because it was the right thing. There are moments when silence is cowardice, and I couldn't keep quiet while you were treated like that. Amara looked away. His words were too heavy for a soul unaccustomed to any gesture of protection. Inside, she wrestled with a feeling she had never known. The feeling of being valued. Then Kami drew a deep breath like someone carrying an old burden and decided to break the silence he had kept since arriving in the village. I need to tell you who I really am. Amara started looking at him uncertainly. Aren't you just a traveler? She asked almost in a whisper, lowered his head for a moment, then lifted it with resolve. No, I'm not. I am the son of Obamamensa, one of the most respected men in the region. I am heir to lands and herds, but I chose to walk these roads as a simple laborer. Amara's heart raced. His words seemed impossible. An heir, a man of wealth, and a respected name. She couldn't believe that the one who had carried her buckets was someone so different from what he appeared to be. But why, she asked, barely audible. Why hide who you are? Wami sighed. Because wealth hides the truth. When everyone knows your name, they offer only false smiles. I wanted to see what people are really like. How they treat those who can give them nothing in return. I wanted to know life without titles, without privilege. That's how I came to you. Amara fell silent. The memories of a lifetime weighed on her. She had always been treated as nothing. She had always heard she had no worth. And now before her stood a man who, though he could have everything, chose to look at her as an equal. But I'm not worthy of you, she murmured, lowering her face. I'm only a servant, the daughter no one wanted to protect. Wami touched her hand gently, lifting her eyes. Amara, you don't understand. It was precisely your strength that showed me who you are. You endure pain every day, and still you keep walking. That is dignity. That is courage. The words fell on her like rain on parched ground. For the first time, someone saw value where everyone else saw only misery, and that someone was not a pitying neighbor, but an heir who could have chosen any other woman in the region. Amara wept, but not tears of despair. They were tears of relief, of shock, of a hope that sprang up without asking permission. Seeing her state, Quaim simply said, Keep the secret for now. Not everyone is ready to know who I am. It's not time yet. The wind blew along the river, carrying with it the weight of that moment. Amara knew her life would never be the same. That secret was dangerous, but it was also the first proof that her pain had not been ignored by fate. Night's silence fell over them, but it was no longer a silence of abandonment. It was a silence heavy with promise, with revelation, with something greater yet to come. And Amara, for the first time in many years, returned home with the feeling that she was not invisible. She knew something no one else knew. The young man everyone judged a mere stranger was in truth an heir in disguise, and that secret kept in silence was the key that would change everything. The news spread like wind through dry grass. No matter how much Kwa and Amara tried to keep a secret, the villagers' watchful eyes had already caught signs that could not be ignored. A lingering look, a careful gesture, a silence heavy with meaning. Any of these was enough for whispers to gather weight, and as always, the heart of the village knew, even before lips confirmed it, there was something different between the outsider and the water girl. When Near discovered the truth about Wame, the anger that was already great turned into a volcano. The stepmother felt her power at risk. 4 years, she had propped herself up on the contempt everyone held for Amara. It was easy to command when the stepdaughter lived bent, invisible, without worth. But now an heir, not just any man, but the son of Obermensa, respected and wealthy, was drawing near to the girl she had so long humiliated. For Near that was unacceptable. An envy like a poisonous plant began to grow in her heart. .ny gathered her daughters, Zinhel and Tararo, and devised a plan. If Wame truly was an heir, then he should marry someone of his station, someone who could bring prestige to the household, and according to her, no one better than her own daughters. Listen well, Nay said firmly that night. This young man will not waste his life on a shadow like Amara. Tomorrow you will get yourselves ready. I want you shining clean dresses, well-combed hair, broad smiles. We'll show him what beauty and worth mean. Zinhal and Tarari obeyed at once, delighted at the idea of becoming the wife of an heir. Deep down, they too felt envious of the attention Wame gave the stepdaughter, and each gesture of his kindness was like salt in wounds they didn't know how to name. So they prepared as never before, with simple adornments flaunted as if they were gold, and with rehearsed lines meant to charm. The next day, as walked through the market, the two surrounded him. They offered fresh fruit, praised his strength, and tried to win his favor with smiles and dainty gestures. Zinhel, the bolder one, came to close, almost touching his arm, while Tarari spoke of how she knew to cook and keep a house. But Kame wasn't fooled. His gaze was steady, and his bearing revealed a conviction they didn't recognize. He listened politely, thanked them for their offers, but did not stray from what was already written in his heart. And when he tried to step away, Zinhil, unwilling to accept rejection, said loudly, "Why waste your time with Amara? She has nothing to offer you. We, on the other hand, can give you joy, beauty, a dignified life." The market fell silent for a few moments. People heard the accusation and waited for their plea. Wami lifted his face and answered calmly, yet firmly, "Joy and dignity cannot be bought with trinkets or sweet words. I have seen more beauty in Amara's courage than in any decorated dress. I have seen more worth in her silence bearing pain without complaint than in any forced smile." His words echoed among the stalls. The women whispered, some in admiration, others in disbelief. The men nodded, recognizing the truth, and Zinhal and Tariro, red with shame, drew back. Nero, watching from afar, felt her blood boil. The public rejection of her daughters was more than an affront. It was proof she was losing control. What she had always considered a nobody was becoming someone in the eyes of the village. The envy already burning in her chest took the shape of desperation. She could not allow Amara to be chosen. She could not bear to see the stepdaughter she had always treated as a slave become the wife of a respected heir. And in that instant, she swore to herself she would do anything to destroy that bond. But the truth was that the more she tried to manipulate, the more Neri exposed her own weakness. Because before everyone, Kami showed a firmness no one could bend. He did not seek riches or superficial beauty. He sought character, and that was something neither Near nor her daughters could offer. Envy gathered strength, but at the same time revealed its own poison. The village began to perceive the contrast. On one side, arrogance disguised as elegance. On them, pain. At Nyri, on the other hand, no longer walked through the village with the same haughtiness. Her eyes, once arrogant, now dropped under the community's gaze. Her words, once feared, no longer carried the same force. For when truth is spoken before all, the lie loses its breath. Zinhil and Tiro did not escape either. The same neighbors who had laughed with them now murmured criticism. They always thought themselves better, but in the end, they're nothing but mirrors of their mother. The family's isolation began to take shape. Amara's father, Kofi, perhaps was the most affected. For years, his silence sustained Naira's tyranny. But after what he saw at the fair, he could no longer deny it. His look, once indifferent, now carried shame. He sought out his daughter hesitantly, like someone who wishes to make amends but already knows it is too late. Amara, for her part, no longer looked for approval in his eyes. She had learned to walk without his support. Then came the day when Kwame decided to reveal the whole truth. The square once again filled with people. No one wanted to miss what was about to happen. The young man who until then had been seen as a simple traveler raised his voice before everyone and said, "My name is Kwame Mensah, son of Obermensa. I came to this village to learn the truth of hearts. I hid who I was because I wanted to see beyond false smiles, to know who would treat a stranger with dignity and who would trample the weak." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Many widened their eyes. Others who had judged him a mere wanderer now bowed in respect. Wayne continued, "And in the midst of this village, I found a woman who was humiliated and despised, yet kept her soul intact. While others tried to offer me beauty and promises, she showed me the strength of one who endures without losing faith. That is why before you all I declare, I do not seek wealth or appearance. I seek a companion in soul, and I choose Amara." The impact was profound. Some wept in silence. Others applauded with discreet claps. The heart of the village had been transformed. Those who had once seen only the water's slave now saw an honored woman chosen not for convenience but for true merit standing at his side. Amara had no words. Only silent tears traced her face. They were not tears of pain, but of deliverance. The same square where she had been dragged by the hair was now the stage of her raising up not by the hand of her stepmother, but by the hand of destiny. NY and her daughters were in the crowd, but they no longer dared raise their voices. Their eyes, once full of arrogance, now lowered, unable to bear the weight of shame. And that silence, more than any punishment, was their defeat. The Ville's transformation lay not only in others' eyes, but also in Amara's gait. She, who had always walked bent beneath the weight of water and humiliation, now held herself upright and steady, not out of empty pride, but because she had finally been seen a Schumann, as worthy as someone who had always been more than the invisible chains others tried to fasten on her. That day, the village grasped a truth that would echo for generations. A person's worth is measured neither by appearance nor by wealth, but by the courage to keep the heart clean amid injustice. And Amara, the young woman all had called a slave, became a symbol of honor and resilience. The sun was setting behind the hills, when the village gathered once more in the central square. There were no longer jeering laughs or malicious whispers. The air was heavy with expectation, as if everyone knew this would be a day etched into their collective memory, and indeed it would. Wami walked to the center, his posture firm and his gaze serene. At his side stood Amura, her hands trembling but her heart lifted. She was no longer the slight young woman who carried buckets beneath insults. She was a woman who had learned to endure, to wait, to resist, and now before everyone the time for the final revelation had come. Raised his voice, and his words rang out like a rousing drum beat. "For a long time I hid who I was, but today there is no need for silence. I am Wami Mensah, son of Obermensa, here to lands and herds. Many of you saw me as a poor traveler, others as a ruthless outsider. But the truth is that I came here to know the heart of people, not their adornments." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Men and women looked at one another, some in admiration, others ashamed of how quickly they had judged. Then took Amara's hand, and his voice steady filled the square. "Before you all I declare, I do not choose Amara for appearances. I do not choose her because she offered me riches or promises. I choose her because, even in humiliation, she never lost her dignity. Because while many turned away, she carried her burdens with a strength few could bear. She is, to me, the most honorable woman in this village." The silence that followed was profound. Those words echoed in their hearts as a truth impossible to deny. Some wept quietly, others nodded in agreement. For the first time, everyone clearly saw what had always been before their eyes, the greatness of a soul that never gave up, even when the whole world seemed against her. NY Aru once wielded her voice as a weapon could no longer speak. She stood among the crowd, but her lowered eyes betrayed defeat. The venom she had spread so often had turned into bitter silence. Her daughters, Zinhel and Tararo, no longer laughed. Their flushed faces showed that pride built on vanity and arrogance had no place there anymore. Amara's father, Kofi, approached slowly, overcome by a mix of regret and shame. He tried to take his daughter's hand as if to repair years of abandonment. But Amara, without rancor, simply drew back gently. She no longer needed that validation because she felt no pain, but because she had learned that love and recognition would not come from where she had waited for them all her life. Now she had something greater. She had her dignity restored before everyone. The village, which for years had been complicit in silence, now became a witness to justice. Eyes once filled with scorn were now filled with respect. Women who had so often watched her in silence murmured quiet blessings, as if asking forgiveness. Men who had never dared intervene recognized in Wami the courage they themselves had lacked. And so destiny fulfilled itself. The young woman who carried water like a slave now became a symbol of honor. Not by taking revenge, not by shouting down her enemies, but because truth sooner or later always finds its way. The sun had already vanished, and in the sky the first stars appeared as witnesses. Amara, tears in her eyes, lifted her head for the first time without fear. She no longer walked bent, no longer hid her face. She walked upright, not to flaunt, but to live as what she had always been, a worthy woman. And the village learned something it would not forget. Justice may take time, but it never fails. Those who humiliate reap shame, and those who endure in silence reap honor. That late afternoon, the people understood that Amara was no longer just the water girl. She was the voice of all the forgotten, humiliated, invisible women. She was the living reminder that quiet faith and dignity are worth more than any wealth. And her story became a lesson not spoken but felt. Destiny may delay, but it never fails the just. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us keep bringing you real and emotional stories like this one. Thank you for being part of our